the thing about a lot of the national security issues in a world where we are no longer facing universal pressure from an adversary who punishes us for our mistakes is that it takes a while for those chickens to come home to roost. And by November of this year, we will not be hearing the clucking of those chickens, not yet. Give it a few years, and we certainly will, in ways that I think will greatly dismay our public, but not by November. So if folks are going into the voting booth and sorting things out on the basis of our present international position or our national security issues, I don't think that that's going to hurt the Democrats either. All things being equal, therefore, and I know that this will seem unbecoming coming from a Republican, but see, I have this bad habit. Partisan or no partisan, when I look at a fact, I try to point it out. And the truth of the matter is that right now, all of those material factors cut in favor of the Democrats, and the Republicans have an uphill battle in this election year convincing the American people that a change is required on those grounds. However, there's more than a little bit of hope for a Republican victory, because looking back over the last several years, and I, of course, have the advantage of doing this from a position where I had spent several years prior to that talking about the issues of moral concern to the country. I look back over the last several years, and lo and behold, I've been going around this time talking, of course, to Republican audiences and others, and guess what? I have no problem whatsoever now convincing people that America's in the midst of a great moral crisis that affects our institutions at the highest levels. I wonder why. Actually, I think all of you could guess why. We have but to say two words, and most Americans are put in mind of that moral crisis and of the impact that it has had on our national institutions, on our national pride. We have been through a degrading and shameful period. And for most Americans, the pain of it was far more substantive than I think, generally speaking, we give credit for. Because most Americans love their country. And I think most of us are kind of proud of it, too. We look back on our heritage, particularly in the course of the 20th century, and we see a nation that in many ways has answered the call of decency and of justice, has fought the great battles against tyranny and oppression, has stood in the world for something that, with the blemishes here and there, but nonetheless, on balance, moved things in the right direction. And was something that when you mention it to your children or show them the flag or talk about the role that you may have played in it, you can do so with pride. I think that sense of a justifiable, not overweening, but still clear pride is precisely what has been challenged in the course of the last several years. And what I have found is that many Americans actually grieve deeply because of the perception that we have somehow lost the luster of that moral dignity for which this nation has stood and has deservedly stood in the course of the 20th century. It's not a good feeling when we have to be ashamed of the President of the United States. It's a painful feeling when there are aspects of his tenure we feel loath to speak of in front of our minor children. It is a painful experience when we know that on that account, the aspiration to serve the nation, even at the highest level, has been dulled. For what dulls that aspiration is a symptom of what dulls citizenship in general in this society. And the loss of a sense of commitment to that citizenship actually is one of the things that portends the end of our republic. And that's why I think that, all things being equal, the Republicans could actually look at this upcoming election with a sense of confidence. Because there has, in fact, been an egregious failure of moral stewardship on the part not only of the president, but on the part of the party that circled the wagons around his lies, his corruption, his betrayal of oath and conscience. If the American people go into the voting booth thinking about that failure of moral stewardship, then the Democrats, in spite of economy and everything else, will be tossed out of the White House on their ear, and they will deserve, and have indeed deserved, to be tossed out. See, and I think that that's at least in part because Americans aren't as stupid as some people think we are. We know that the great prosperity, the strength, the victory in wars, the overcoming of enemies, all of it was the result of the moral heritage, the moral strength, the moral foundations that allowed this country to persevere when the material factors were not in our favor, to get through depressions and wars for which we were not readily prepared, to fight enemies that at times seemed already to have engrossed the earth with their power. We did not give up. We were able to persevere because we looked back upon a moral heritage that gave us strength. A moral heritage that gave us the confidence in the end to understand that though in a general kind of way we're probably no better or worse than most human beings, but in terms of our national identity and our national aspirations, there is much that this nation has stood for and much that it has achieved to help mankind both articulate and reach toward the better aspiration of its moral nature. If as a party you squander that moral heritage, if as a party you show no regard for that true basis of our strength, then that too becomes an egregious reason for the American people to toss you out. The question, therefore, that faces the Republicans right now is whether they're going to be able to articulate for the American people the nature and significance of the moral challenge that faces us so that by the time folks go into that voting booth, there will be a sufficient number of them convinced that the moral crisis is relevant and that its political consequences are intolerable, and that therefore the Democrat stewardship of the White House must be rejected. That's going to require, by the way, something that you don't ordinarily see in politics. It's going to require that someone stand forward and with a kind of boldness that has been egregiously lacking in dealing with these issues up to now is able to present them, both in terms of principle and application, in a way that makes them relevant to the conscience and choice of the people. On this hinges the prospect for victory of the Republican Party, in my view. And that means that the folks who are part of the electorate choosing the Republican standard bearer had better wake up from their delusions. Those people who are trotting out folks with big names and this kind of money and that, and yet who have nothing in their background or expression that prepares them to meet the moral challenge of this election year and to articulate it in a way that the American people understand. Matter of fact, they are so far from understanding it that some, in spite of their record and background, have no sense whatsoever of the relevance of these issues.